So this is a quick video with a demonstration that I did on painting loosely and semi-abstractly using a landscape image. I used the same reference image for both the watercolor and the acrylic versions of this. So the first section here, I began with the acrylic painting, sketched it out, and this is just watercolor paper or mixed media paper. And I like to make sure that I tape off the edges so that I have a nice clean border. And of course, I'm starting with the sky. So getting that in blues and just sort of mixing some colors in there, trying to make it a little bit lighter towards the bottom. Again, bringing in some other colors just to keep the sky a little bit more interesting, but trying to keep it a little bit lighter and brighter. So now I've got the basic sky in, and again, it's not finalized, it's just, I just wanted to get some basic colors in, and I'm now starting to work on the background, the distant hills, the stuff that's furthest away, so it's going to be a little bit cooler and a little bit more subtle as far as color value. And again, I'm just blocking in the land masses, the areas. I'm not trying to paint any detail. I'm just looking at the photo where the light seems to be hitting and where the shadows and the landscape are. So I'm just getting some basic color values in, mixing them on my palette as I go. Sometimes I also mix them on my painting, especially with acrylic paint. Throwing in some highlights just to remind myself where those lighter values are in the landscape. And in this one, if you remember from the photo, there was a little roadway that came in here that sort of goes into the background area and disappears into the hills. So I'm going to put that in. And now I'm just continuing to add some of that color into the white areas in the foreground that I haven't blocked in yet. And I'm trying to keep those colors mixed so that there isn't really flat colors. The landscape is really a menagerie of colors. Everything's sort of mixed together visually. So I'm trying to interpret that in the paint mixes that I'm doing as well. And keeping it super loose and non-detailed. So now I'm throwing in a few of the little tree lines back there. There's some highlight on the hill back there. So I am adding a little bit more detail here in value changes and the hues and colors that I'm using, but I'm not trying, again, to get super detailed. This is really a very impressionistic, sort of loose landscape. I'm brightening up the hills, although I think I come back and, yeah, I adjust the color here because that blue is a little too bright for the closer hills. And then you'll see that I pull that color into the landscape in other places, just so there's some harmonious colors throughout. I don't want to mix individual colors all over the place. So I try to bring some of those colors a little bit into the middle ground. Now I'm starting to add some of the shadows in those bushes and grasses that are running along the road. Using my smaller round brush to do that. There's some bright kind of red and burnt orange colored grasses and vegetation in that lower right corner. So again, I'm just doing that initially as an sort of an undercolor to get that color in there. Reminding myself that stuff in the foreground is going to be, you know, a little darker and a little more detailed. And there again, you'll see that I pulled some of that red into the mid-ground there to pull some of that red color back into the landscape. And I'm just brightening it up a little bit. It got a little dark in the mid-ground there. I really wanted to bring some of that light back in, especially that's hitting some of those facing hills, the top edges of the hills, to reflect the bright light. And then I'm just now adding in some details, a little bit more texture in the front here. And you'll see there's the photo up there that as a reference photo. It is fairly bright, which is why I went back and added some of those bright colors in the mid-ground there. Now I'm back working at the sky a little bit. I want to soften out some of those colors. Again, also brighten it up. It's a very bright landscape. Now pulling in a little bit of the green from the landscape. You'll see I added some green in the clouds there. A little bit more white. Some of that darker blue from the hills. But again, I soften all of this out. I keep my brush strokes really, really loose and multi-directional. I'm not trying to paint all these clouds super soft, you know, realistic. And darkening up the top of the sky just a little bit to create some atmospheric perspective, so that the top of the sky generally is a little bit darker than the horizon. And now I'm coming back, since the front has dried here a little bit, to brighten up some of those grassy areas in the front. Using my fan brush to create a little bit of texture there. Now this is sped up a little bit, but in real time I do paint this fairly quickly because I don't want to fuss over it. So I'm just making the marks and leaving it be. And you'll see at the end of this front area is probably still a little bit messy. I probably could have just stopped right here and been done with it. I do come back and add a few little highlights in just to add some pops of color, a little bit lighter pops of color in. Now I'm just cleaning up some of the little spots that are highlights. Again, pulling some of that sunlight into the grasses in the front here and into the mid-ground areas. So again, here I'm just probably fiddling too much because this was just sort of a demo study, but I wanted to make sure that the foreground had much more detail than the other areas, just to get through the concept of things being closer, need to be a little bit more defined. But I was doing this quickly, so it got a little bit muddy, and then it's just a question of putting some finishing marks on. The front bottom right side probably needs a few more darks in it, kind of in there. And I now came back and saw that it was probably just too busy, so I just kind of flattened some of that color out, and again pulled some of that into the midground. Back. So that was the finished version. And then the watercolor version, again, I used the same photo, starting with the sky and the lightest area in the back. And I'm just using my sketchbook for this, so it's a watercolor sketchbook that has watercolor paper. Now you'll see it's got a lot of texture to it, but I use these for practice or demos or test paintings. I'm trying to test out some colors, or I'm doing just some small thumbnail sketches of other things. And then this one, I'm creating the clouds just using a paper towel there that I just crumple up and blot out. And I'm going to start in the background hills, again, keeping it fairly blue-green, very muted colors. They're in the distance. Now watercolor dries lighter, so these look a little bit strong now, but they do dry a little bit lighter. I'm using a 1/2 inch flat brush here. I really like using flat brushes for watercolor. I just find, especially with landscapes, it gives me a little bit more control for putting in sort of horizontal spaces. And here now I think I switched to a smaller round brush. And I'm thickening up the paint. So I'm just dropping in those tree lines, and the paint is still wet, so those trees will sort of soften into the landscape and just give a sense that there's something back there, but I don't have to define everything. And again, this was done fairly quickly. I obviously did this all in one session, and it probably was no more than 10 or 15 minutes as I talked through this, just to give them kind of a demo on letting the things mix in a loose painting, especially with watercolor, and not overthinking it and not over painting it. And so here I'm putting in some of those red-orange details from the flowers in the front, mixing the colors so that it's not a big solid blob of one color, but letting those colors mingle kind of wet, just to give the impression that there's something there and there's some volume to it. There's some distance and three-dimensionality. Now to the left side of the road, which has a little bit of sunlight hitting the top, but then it's got a darker shadow because the sun is kind of coming from the left, so it's creating a little bit of a shadow on that bottom edge of that left side of the roadway there, pathway. And then just darkening up again a little bit to, it will dry lighter, so I want to make sure that there's enough of a value change in the front that the contrast makes it look like it's closer and more defined. And then again, just adding a little bit more detail in the vegetation in the front. And then I decided I wanted to darken up the sky just a little bit. There was kind of a white line just along the horizon there that I didn't like, so I wanted to pull some of that blue color down. And then I'm just using a damp brush to lift out some clouds. Just add a little bit of water so I can lift it out. And you'll see in the photo that the sky is much brighter, but I liked the blue I had.